We see from studies in cold showers, it's a study from Amsterdam, where they have tested whether a cold shower a day of 30 seconds up to 90 seconds will decrease the sick days that they have during a month. They did see that people had less sick days when they go into cold showers.
Welcome to the Proof Podcast, a space for science-based conversation exploring the health and longevity benefits that come with mastering nutrition, physical exercise, mindfulness, recovery, sleep, and alignment. Facts, nuance, and trustworthy recommendations, minus the hyperbole. In today's episode, I sit down with Dr. Susanna Soeberg to talk about her research looking at how cold and hot exposure affects human health. In this conversation, you'll learn about brown fat, what it is and how it relates to metabolism, how brown fat is different to white fat, how cold exposure activates brown fat, how cold exposure affects metabolism and mood, and Dr. Soeberg's recommended weekly protocol for cold and hot exposure, which comes from her research that she published in Cell Medicine Reports in 2021, looking at winter swimmers in Denmark. The science of hot and cold exposure is certainly an understudied area, but there are some interesting preliminary findings that suggest such practices can improve our health and quality of life. Both a form of good stress when performed at the right dose, similar to exercise and the consumption of plant compounds like polyphenols, cause our body to adapt and grow stronger. With that, here's my conversation with Dr. Susanna Soeberg. Dr. Soeberg, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to be doing this.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for inviting me. I am very much looking forward to our conversation.
You're welcome. I have your first book here, Winter Swimming, in front of me. And firstly, I'd like to say congratulations because I saw a post of yours just before on social media and I believe you're about to release your second book.
I did. I just released a new book, which is the follow-up, you can say, after Winter Swimming. Winter Swimming is my first book, and it's now out in the US and Australia and other English-speaking countries.
So tell me quickly, what's the second book all about? I know that's not really the focus necessarily of today's conversation, but if you were to I guess, as a bit of a summary or a synopsis of each book, what is Winter Swimming all about, and what's this follow-up book more focused on?
Yeah, so the first book, Winter Swimming, which is not only about winter swimming, it's just cold water immersion, and it's sauna, and about the club culture. It's divided into the physical health and the mental health side. You can say that it's maybe an introduction to my research. It's very much about the brown fat and why I went into this research. What is the brown fat? Why is it healthy? So it's the whole introduction to my research. But in the second book, which is Thermalist, you get another, you can say it's another digging into the benefits of cold and heat exposure, hormesis. It's also very much a debate about our health crisis and why I see that temperature changes can be a way to go for increasing our health as a preventive tool, but also a debate about how we today, because we are so comfortable in our society, how we can use cold and heat to widen our window for stress, actually. So it's a follow-up book, but I think Winter Swimming, that is like the first book introducing to Thermalist, and these two books are very good they're very connected, but not the same books. So it's,
Right.
yeah, I hope people will enjoy.
Yes, no, well, I'm sure they will. I think the timing's perfect. There's ice bath centers and saunas opening up everywhere, so it seems like people are really interested in this as a practice and a way to improve their health. So I think there will be a big appetite for. I know there's an appetite already for winter swimming, but I think your second book will be very, very popular. In Winter Swimming, at the beginning of the book, you say, I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to examine the happiest people in the world. The happiest people in the world. What can you tell us about the people in Denmark who do this, the winter swimmers, who are these people, and what do you think makes them so happy?
Yeah, so Denmark and Scandinavian countries are worldwide known for being a happy place, a happy people. And it's not only because of the winter swimming, it's because of other you can say, socio-economical status and also political things that we have here, which supports people but I think that we have the nature. We have something which many populations in the world maybe have forgotten more than we have. Not that we are perfect, but we definitely still go out and winter swim, especially in Denmark. We use the nature very much. Just for an example, so each person in Denmark don't have more than 50 kilometers to the water. So we have the water very close by. We have a lot of forest, so we can go and take a walk in the nature, and we can go and have a swim in open sea or in a lake. So it's very much something that we use already as children. We also sleep in the cold as children in the pram, so we put them outside so the children sleep there. And that is also something that is very rare, I know. So being a happiness country, as Denmark is known for, is very much about us being connected to the nature, I think. But I was surprised, I must say, when I went into my research and I started recruiting winter swimmers for my study. I was surprised that this saying about winter swimmers being very happy, that was actually true. They were so happy and positive about my studies, about being there and being part of this. And I think that is a phenotype for winter swimmers, which we can debate maybe more the physiological reasons for later.
Sure. So if someone hasn't been to Denmark, how would you describe the winter swimming culture? Is this someone joins a swimming club and then you go down to a meeting place in the morning and there's a group of people and you sort of get into the water together, and walk us through what this looks like and how long people are in the water together, and what is that experience like as a winter swimmer?
Yeah, let me just put up a scenario. That is maybe the best way to do it. So imagine that you are walking by the sea, and you see this group of people. They walk out on the jetty, and you can see they're in their bathrobes and they're laughing, and you can see there are maybe 3 or 4 people. You don't have to be part of a club to do this. You can just invite your friends to do it, right? And they meet up in the morning. I live very close by with the sea here, and that is how it looks. If you take a walk down the seaside here, you will see people walk out on the jetty, laughing and enjoying that being out there in the cold, going out on the jetty, and then they plunge, each one of them, down in the water, take a few swim strokes in the water, and then they go up again. And you can totally see that the happiness hormones kick in as soon as they get into the water. And when they then go up on the jetty and walk out again, they are laughing, smiling, and it looks maybe a little bit crazy. That is also something that I have thought a bit about, because I wasn't a winter swimmer when I started my studies. So I was a bit like, what are you doing? This is like insanely cold. And it must hurt a bit, because, cold pain because of the cold water is definitely there. So why are they laughing? So if you don't really understand this from a practical side, trying this out, this laughing and being this enthusiastic about just this cold dip, you kind of won't understand it completely. So right. This understanding this whole culture is something you probably can't unless you try it. But we have like a very good culture for going winter swimming in Denmark. That is something that I also write about, because I think it's important. It's an important part.
Yeah, I understand that. I can see if someone wasn't aware of how it affects your physiology and some of the benefits, they would think, why on earth would you subject yourself to that horrible experience? Yes. You mentioned there that, or I believe what you mentioned was that before you did your PhD and you started looking at the effect of winter swimming on physiology and thinking about brown fat, etc., you weren't actually winter swimming yourself. Is that right?
That is right.
So without that history, I guess, of doing this practice yourself, what was it that led you to pursue your PhD in metabolism and then focus on brown fat and winter swimming?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So as you just said, I wasn't a winter swimmer when I started my research in brown fat and in winter swimmers and sauna bathers. I was, on the other hand, very interested in the physiology. So when I went back to university after working at the hospital, I needed to go back because I wanted to find out what is actually the root cause of why people get sick. Because at the hospital, you meet the sick people, but I really wanted to look into more a preventive side of this. So preventive medicine, I thought that maybe if I could find the root cause of inflammation and maybe we can lower inflammation and stress, that will be a way to go, and I can go out and give some advice to people before they actually get sick. So, but this is like more than 10 years ago I started this journey, but I did some other research in FGF21 and we discovered the sweet tooth, you can say a hormone for the sweet tooth and the negative feedback loop to the brain. And that also was interesting, but I wanted to figure out something that I could go out and give an advice on. Do this and you will lower your inflammation and you will protect yourself a bit from being sick, or you could increase your life quality. And brown fat came up as one of the new hot organs that you can explore in the body, and we didn't know that much about it when I started this research. So from around year 2000, new studies came up where we can see that if you expose yourself to the cold, both we saw this in mice studies, but also in human studies, showing that if you are obese or if you have type 2 diabetes and you can activate your healthy brown fat, then you will increase your thermogenesis, you will increase your metabolism and burn calories in this way because you clear the sugar and the fat from the bloodstream. And because researchers discovered that you could clear sugar and fat from the bloodstream by activating the brown fat, they saw this as an opportunity to prevent lifestyle diseases. So in year 2016, when I started my research, we didn't really know that much about the brown fat in humans. How much do we have? Can we activate it with cold? Do everyone have it? At that time, there was many questions unsolved at this time. But I figured if we already know now, and I went through the literature, read a lot about the cold and activation of brown fat, a lot of mice studies in the brown fat showed that you could activate this. But there was one really interesting study that showed that if you sleep cold by 19 degrees Celsius in 1 month, then you will activate your brown fat. You will increase the amount of healthy brown fat that you have, and that will increase your insulin sensitivity. So I thought that was very interesting. There was like PET CT scannings of the brown fat. So I thought that was a good way to start. And from there on, I got interested in what else can we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was going to ask you that I've always found it much easier to sleep in a very cold room, even 16 or 17 degrees to be fair. And when it's kind of above 19 degrees, I find it hard to sleep. When you say people in that study were, I think you said, did you say 18 degrees?
19 degrees, yes.
19
Celsius.
degrees. So that's the room temperature. Did they also have like a doona cover or blankets as well that they had on top of them?
Yeah, apparently they did, and they were wearing light clothes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is going on. So I don't want people to go home and turn their heater down to 19 degrees and then sleep completely naked because I want to activate the brown fat. I just want to point out that you can sleep with like a blanket or a duvet, and you should think about activating your brown fat from not only from the core skin or something like that. It's also from your face. It's exposing your hands to the cold, but it's actually, I think, and this is not tested in studies, but I think that because we have cold receptors or temperature receptors in our mouth and down our throat and also in our lungs, then we have activation of the brown fat because of that, because that is so close to the central nervous system. So inhaling cold air, also when you go for a walk out in nature, just inhaling the cold air is going to activate your brown fat. Imagine that when we evolved as this human species, that must be a very important organ in our body to temperature regulate us immediately as soon as we get cold, because if there wasn't this very sensitive organ that can temperature control us, then we would die very quickly. And the muscles are not very efficient in sensing the temperature that quickly. It's way too late when the muscles start shivering. So we have these two organs in our body that's going to save us from the cold, from hypothermia or hyperthermia. So it's both hot and cold. And that is going to be firstly the brown fat, and then it's the muscles.
Mm-hmm. I want to put a pin in brown fat, and we'll come back to that and sort of double click on that, particularly for someone who may be hearing, this concept or idea of brown fat for the first time. And you mentioned before it's an organ, so there's a lot for us to explore there. Before that, I'm interested on your personal kind of journey here. So you weren't winter swimming, you became interested in researching brown fat and thinking about winter swimming and the effect that it has on our physiology. When was it? Was there a certain time where you became convinced that this was going to be a practice that you would adopt personally?
It's such a good question, Simon. And I think it's very funny today because when I started my research, I was really a cold sissy. I was not a person who would ever jump into cold water. I was very comfortable, and I think in that way I look like many other people who reject the cold and see the cold as something unnecessary for us, which I definitely learned later on is very not true. So temperature changes kind of got interesting for me because I found these studies in people sleeping in the cold and increasing their insulin sensitivity. But all the way through this, I was just thinking, how can I use this information to find out what I can go and give an advice on? And because I live in Denmark, I think very quickly I was thinking, okay, so what can we do? So we have people working outside, but we also have people going out in the cold, winter swimmers. So that kind of like became a very funny thing that I went to my supervisor saying, what do you think we should study winter swimming? I mean, I know there are no studies showing that you can activate the brown fat with cold water. There was nothing at this time. But I was thinking that this could be funny in a way to see if this thing that we do in Denmark is something that we can activate our metabolism with. But very much later, a year later, just studying this and putting up the study and writing the ethical protocol and also recruiting subjects for my study. It was a long field study. I had to go on many jetties in Denmark to just observe what is actually going on. And all the way through, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm studying this, but this is not something I want to do, because I was very much rejecting the cold as well. But at some point, so a group of winter swimmers wrote me, and they were very persistent. They were like, you cannot study this, Susanna, until you try. And at this point, a year into my studies, I was thinking, okay, I understand the literature now. I know what's going on. I couldn't find a really good reason not to do it, because I saw that it's not, if you do it deliberately and you don't have heart problems and you don't have unregulated high blood pressure, it should be fairly safe to do this, and it should be healthier than it's dangerous. So I figured I can't find a good reason not to do it. And in theory, my own theory was that if I can activate the brown fat in this way, I should become a warmer person. So with all this calculation, I know I was thinking a lot about it. I was analyzing this a lot before I went out. But then I tried for the first time, and I must say it was so painful. For me, it was so painful, and I have learned to become a winter swimmer, but it did take a while. But I just, with that, want to say that I represent very much the comfortable people out there saying, oh, we reject the cold, we don't like it, we're afraid of it. But you can definitely build up an adaptation, and it's not going to take that long. But I had to try at least 3-4 times before I felt like there was a shift.
Mm-hmm. And just for context, if someone's kind of imagining this, so you're out there, you're doing your field research, and you've been convinced to get in the water yourself, what's the temperature of the water in the winter in Denmark?
So on average, it's not 0. It's around 4 degrees in winter time. So in October, where our winter swimming season starts, it's around 15 degrees Celsius, and it quickly goes down to, in October, it goes down to 9. And when you get to January, it's around 2 degrees, 2 or 0. It's depending on if we have snow and ice. But it's around 0 degrees, 2 degrees on average.
Right. That's a little bit colder than winter where I am usually in Bondi. But I was pleased to see in your book you actually had a photo of Bondi icebergs, and you spoke about the I guess the culture of winter swimming not just being something that people are doing or getting involved in, embracing in Scandinavia, but all around the world.
Yeah. It is really something that surprised me, because when I looked into the literature, I could see that studies were conducted in cold water immersion other places than just from the north. So I was thinking, if they are interested in doing this kind of research, what's actually happening out in their culture? So doing some research, I felt like a journalist as well. I had to look up where people would go and dip in the water, and I found places in China, in Japan, in South Africa, the US and Australia. It's just everywhere. I think that these clubs and this culture has their own places in different places in the world, and everywhere where there's a mountain, you can say, and there's cold on the mountain, you will have downstream water coming from the mountain, and that's cold. So even in countries where you normally would think, well, this is a hot country, you could have streams that are really cold.
You mentioned 2 degrees and 4 degrees earlier there when you were talking about the temperature of the water in Denmark, and we might come back to that when we talk about protocols and what would the ideal sort of temperature and whatnot be, if there is one. But other than your research looking into brown fat and metabolism and whatnot, which we'll get to, that experience of you getting into the cold water and that, overcoming a fear and I guess proving to yourself that you could do it, has that process, did that sort of journey teach you anything about yourself when you sort of reflect back on that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It taught me that I could definitely do something which I think is very, very difficult. Something that I reject, which was definitely the cold. I could overcome my fear, and I felt my confidence in myself also increased because I did something which I would not associate myself with. I overcame the fear of going into the cold water, the dark water, because it's also very dark in Denmark. So going down in the dark water, it's a bit unknown. It triggers my fear. It's cold at the same time, and maybe I will slip. So there is so many fear going on in the beginning, which I overcame, and I felt so proud of myself. And this can be explained in physiology as well, so what actually goes on in the brain and in the body when you do this. But overcoming the activation of your fear, your sympathetic nervous system being activated, and your whole body is reacting as if you're going to die, that is going to give you some confidence afterwards, because you overcame that stress moment, and that I am using today. I learned myself to handle my stress, and I use it every day now, because if I can do that, I guess there must be so many other things that I can do.
Yeah, that's something that I've certainly experienced myself, but also have heard from other people who put themselves into this kind of context or subject themselves to extreme temperatures, is that they become, I guess, a little bit more resilient, or better able to handle different types of stress in their life. Where are we at today in terms of research looking into this? So when you were doing your PhD, I'm sure part of it was, and you've spoken to this, was looking at what research is out there. Is this a topic that you would say is very well studied and very well funded, or is it understudied and there needs to be a lot more exploration into the effects of deliberate cold exposure on health?
Oh, I love that question, Simon, because I think that my journey is a good example showing how little funding and how little attention this preventive medicine actually has. So when I started this research, I didn't have any thoughts about funding and how I'm going to be funded with this study. I was just generally just super interested in finding out in physiology, how can we actually activate the brown fat by going into nature and just in cold water, because this is going to be free for a lot of people, or very cheap at least. This is something you can do all over the world. But I found out that it was super hard to get the funding. It's not something that our government or other governments have their attention to. So it took me 2.5 years to get the funding for my PhD. So my PhD is actually more than 6 years long, because it took that much time to get the funding. And then when I got it, then it took another more than 3 years to do it actually. But we did have a lot of discussions about this. What is actually the reasons why natural stresses like this is not put more forward as a thing that we should put more funding into. So I guess that with that, I want to say that we need more research on cold water immersion, and we also need more research on sauna, heat exposure, just in general. But the funding is going to be very difficult, but I hope that with my studies and also other studies coming, that we will have more attention on the preventive medicine using cold water immersion. And in that way, maybe we can get some more funding for these kind of studies. But it's difficult. It's very difficult to get the attention to it.
Yeah, I guess from a funding perspective, there's no food industry or drug industry equivalent for winter swimming. Maybe ice bath companies, yes, if they grow big enough.
Yeah.
Contextualize this for us. You mentioned earlier you were looking for ways to get to sort of the root cause of disease. That's what you were interested in with regards to your PhD and study in metabolism and physiology. How important, with everything that you've learned and the research that exists today, how important do you think deliberate cold exposure is, I guess, relative to, say, some of the big hitters that we hear people talking about all the time, like exercise and sleep and a healthy diet?
I think that cold water immersion has a lot of potential as a preventive tool to lower stress and lifestyle diseases. So because of the benefits that we see from my studies, but also from others, and collectively it shows that this will lower your stress level, inflammation in the body, which is also preventing neurological diseases as well. So I think that this has a very much potential in the future as something that we could if we get more studies, and I also think on a long term to get to see the outcomes after 20 years, after 30 years, what happens down the road when we expose ourselves to this form of it's a very potent stressor, right? So it's also needed to have studies showing how much should we do. So like, what are the minimum dose and what is the higher threshold? And we need to know a lot more. But I think that when we get the window for how we're going to do this in praxis and what is healthy for the body, because we don't want to overstress the body. And here we are talking about hormesis, right? So the hormetic stress in the cells. But if we can get that right, I think that this is definitely something that we can use as preventive medicine for all humans, and all over the world. So I think this has a great potential, and I really hope that this is going to be the future.
For someone who has not come across the term hormesis, how would you define that?
So hormetic stress is the process that happens in the cells, and you can during stress. So hormetic stress is the healthy stress. It's also called eustress, and the bad stress is what we call chronic stress. So the body has ability to get more robust if you expose yourself to some form of stress, and when you do that, the cells get stronger. It's like the saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but it's also potentially what if you expose yourself to a short-term stress, then the cells will get stronger, and you won't. If you don't overdo the stress, they won't be exhausted. But we can talk more about what happens in the cells and stuff. But hormetic stress is the good stress. That is what's going to keep our cells younger.
Mm-hmm. And you say don't overdo it. So what's your personal kind of protocol look like at the moment? How many times a week are you doing winter swimming?
Yeah, so cold water immersion, winter swimming, it's just the same thing. When I say winter swimming, I also just mean cold water immersion. I just wanted to point that out as well, because people think that I swim all day in the cold water. I don't. And I don't swim every day, and I don't cold plunge every day, because I'm kind of keeping to my my protocol, which I showed in my research, but a few times a week, sometimes 2 times a week, sometimes 3 times a week, because I believe in something that I call the microstress. So you expose your body to a low dose of stress by going into the cold water and also into the heat, and by that I will create hormetic stress in the cells, and that's going to build them stronger. I think that there is a higher threshold, which we might not know right now, but we see this backed up from studies in sauna, that you can overdo it, and in that way you can exhaust your system, and it's not going to be healthy. So 2 to 3 times per week is what I do.
Mm-hmm. And have you noticed increased participation in deliberate cold exposure in friends and family since your research came out?
Oh yeah, and definitely, and in friends, and I mean the whole city is like, do it even more. I don't know if it's because of me. I didn't really think about that, but I just think that there is a growing trend. It wasn't that much growing when I started my research back in 2016. It was just a little bit on its way. But I have spoken a lot about this in Denmark, and it has grown in popularity, especially after COVID, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so take us through those physiological changes. What occurs? So we jump into that ice cold water. I believe it's sort of up to your neck if you're doing it in an open area of water or in an ice bath. What are the sort of cascade of changes that occur in response to that?
Yeah, so let's just start with the acute responses when you go out on the jetty, or before your ice bath, and you take off your robe. If there's a cold air, you will already there stand in the wind and activate your cold receptors on your skin, and you have 10 times more cold sensitive receptors in your skin that you have for heat. And I think that is very interesting, and probably showing that we would need more receptors for the cold than probably for the heat, because you can easily die from being in the cold a very short amount of time, or falling into water. That is maybe during our evolution that this has happened, that we have these receptors trying to communicate to our brain and to our internal organs and our brown fat to activate as soon as we get a little bit cold on our skin. So that is what's happening when you go out in the cold wind. You take off your robe and you activate your cold receptors. But that is not the full activation in the wind. What happens is that when you have lowered your stress level, when you stand there in the wind and you can breathe calmly, and then you take your first step into the cold water. If you are new to cold water immersion, in the beginning, you will feel a little bit anxious and a little bit panic, and that's going to make your heart rate increase and also your blood pressure. There are studies showing that if you are new to cold water immersion, so a beginner, then you will have an increase in blood pressure for around 20 to 40 millimeter mercury.
Is that one of the reasons why if someone has uncontrolled hypertension, that they should be careful with this?
Yeah, especially when they are new to cold water immersion. So when you go into the cold water, you are new to this, you will have an activation of your sympathetic nervous system. Everybody will have that, also those who are adapted. But if you are new to this, you have a bit of a fear going out in the cold water, and that's the same for everyone, because it's new for you. So everything new, the body's going to react a little bit as if this is just a toxic idea, just in general, and maybe it actually, and it is in general also a bit of toxic thing that you're exposing yourself to when you go into the cold water. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely also something that you will keep reacting to. But you activate your sympathetic nervous system, and you also activate your parasympathetic nervous system, because the diving response will start immediately as you submerge into the cold water. And if you have unregulated high blood pressure, this conflict, or heart problems in general, this conflict of the two systems in your autonomic nervous system is going to create this conflict on the heart and a little bit of strenuous for the heart. And that could, that is not good for the heart, of course. So just be a little bit careful about that. And if people sit out there and thinking, is that me? I have that. Can I still do it? Then I think you should consult your own doctor, because these are just general rules or general advice that I give. So and your doctor knows your history. So ask your own doctor.
Okay, so you jump into the water. You get this activation of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. For beginners, the heart rate's going up. Respiratory rate is also going up at the same time. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Almost hyperventilation.
Rate's going up. Yeah. And what else is occurring? What are the kind of other kind of chemical changes or neurotransmitter changes that are sort of coupled with everything that you've described so far?
Yeah. So studies have shown, both in mice studies but also in humans already back from year 2000, that if you also studies dating back to 1970s show that when you go into cold water, you will have an activation of your sympathetic nervous system and your stress response. So the cold shock will happen immediately. And when that happens, you have an increase in noradrenaline, and cortisol is going a little bit up, but apparently not that much, which is also very good. But you will have the increase of noradrenaline, which will activate both on a synapses between the synapses in the brain, so as a neurotransmitter, but also as hormones. And these stress hormones that are activated in your body is going to make you very alert, and it's going to make the glucose from your liver, from your muscles, that will be released to your bloodstream, so you have fuel to fight or flight.
Yeah, it's a life or death kind of scenario, and your body is changing your physiology to help you get out of this situation.
Exactly, yeah. So that is exactly why we have still the sympathetic nervous system. And even though we don't have lions or other dangerous animals running after us today, we still need to activate this part of our system to keep ourselves healthy. But we don't need it to be activated all the day, which is what happens today in our modern society. But this kind of short-term amount of stress activation in our body is actually healthy for our cells. So as soon as you have that activation and you also activate your diving response, you have the activation of your vagus nerve and also the parasympathetic activation of your autonomic nervous system. So you have this activation of your stress response, but also you'll relax your rest and digest system, which has the ability to increase then neurotransmitters in the brain for mental balance, and that is serotonin. And you also have dopamine, which is from activation of your sympathetic nervous system, which gives you drive and it gives you motivation for doing this again, maybe, but also for anything you want to do during that day, and it lasts for hours afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So there's this, I guess, initial cold shock response, and anyone who's done this will have experienced that. What happens though, because it does get easier. So when you're in the water, it sort of gets to a certain point where everything now feels much easier. And I think you've described that before as a bit of a switch. So can you kind of explain what's happening there with regards to our physiology that could explain that transition from discomfort to something that is a bit more of a bearable experience?
Yeah, so there's you can divide it into three processes. There's the metabolic process, where your brown fat activation, because of the noradrenaline, the increase in noradrenaline when you go into the cold water, is going to activate the brown fat immediately because it's so close to our central nervous system. That is going to be activated, and with time, you will have an increased thermogenesis, of increased activation of the brown fat, which has the course of increasing your heat in your body. So it warms you up from the inside. And the more you expose yourself to the cold, the more mitochondria you will build in the brown fat cells, and they will become more efficient at heating you up and keeping you warm. So with time, you will have it easier getting warmer, but you also, that is one thing. So that's the metabolism. But there's also an increased ability for the body to contract in your blood vessels. So because when you expose yourself to the cold, you will have an increase in nitric oxide, and that is something that makes your blood vessels more elastic. It makes it the ability to contract and dilate even better, and also circulating the oxygen around in your body. That has a lot of benefits, both for focus and for getting yourself warm, and just for circulation, just in general. But when you have exposed yourself to the cold multiple times, you will see that you also get red on your skin when you get up from the cold water, and that is because the ability to dilate the blood vessels is going to be better. And when studies show that if you're adapted to the cold water, the skin gets very cold when you get into the cold water, but it stays colder than people who are not adapted, but they are not getting colder in the core. So this shows that your skin becomes more and more as a shield. The ability to contract and keep the warm blood in your core is increasing with time, with adaptation. So that is like the second thing that happens. But then there's also the hormonal thing. So you also have the increase of noradrenaline, dopamine, and the stress hormones just in general is going to be faster activated when you get adapted to the cold water.
Mm-hmm. So would someone who has more brown fat, would with the sort of time between jumping into the water and going from that discomfort feeling and the kind of cold shock to the more bearable stage, would that be much shorter because they have a better ability to kind of heat their body up quicker?
Yeah, definitely. So if you're getting adapted to the cold water, you will increase your thermogenesis. You will increase your ability to keep your temperature balance in your body much better. So that is one of also the results from my study showing that you get warmer, physically warmer, when you get adapted to cold water.
Right. And just so everyone's on the same page here, so when you're regularly exposing yourself deliberately to cold water, you get this physiological response that you just described, part of which results in an increase in noradrenaline, which is a hormone. And then that hormone activates this organ, this brown fat organ, which I might get you to describe a little bit further and why that's beneficial. But that's sort of where we're at the story so far. And the more, or with maybe not the more is better, but with regular exposure to cold and activating this system, we can increase the amount of brown fat we have. Is that kind of a correct sort of decent summary of where we're up to so far?
Yes, very good.
Okay. So brown fat as an organ, how is it different to, let's just say, white fat or yellow fat, the type of fat that most people probably think of when we mention the word fat?
Yeah. So it's very different. So we have the white fat in the body. We want to get rid of it. It's located on our thighs and around our on our belly and around our inner organs, and that is where it's dangerous actually, and increases the risk of cardiovascular diseases. So we want to get rid of of most of our white fat, because most of us actually have too much of it. And we have this other kind of fat. So the white fat is storing the energy in our body, right? And that is evolutionary very important, because we do need a storage, because sometimes, definitely back in the days, we didn't have enough food, so we did starve for a while, and today we call it fasting, but we starved at some point, and we needed this storage. So the white fat storage is needed in our body. If we don't have it, studies show that these people get sick. So there are people not having the ability to store their white fat, and they are very sick. So we also need a little bit of white fat storage. The brown fat, on the other hand, is completely different. It has very opposite actually. So the brown fat is increasing our energy expenditure. So the brown fat can use energy in the body, and the white fat will store the energy. So the brown fat, upon activation, can actually decrease the white fat in our body. And on a fish, you can say on a cell level, the brown fat cell also look very different from the white fat. So the brown fat cell has, if you look maybe I can draw a picture here for you, but if you look at the brown fat cell, it has one little nuclei. Every cell have that, but it has a lot of mitochondria in the cells, and these are the powerhouses in the cells, so it can be activated upon some kind of stimulus. And for brown fat, the most potent one is cold, and apparently actually also heat. We can get back to that, but it can be activated with some kind of stimulus. And when we do that, it will activate, and then it will heat up. The outcome of activating the brown fat is heat. So when we do that, it will need some fuel to keep it activated, and that is taking up sugar and fat from the bloodstream as fuel to generate this heat. So it's a thermogenic tissue in our body, and that is why it can actually be seen as a preventive organ in our body for obesity and type 2 diabetes, and in that way decrease the white fat.
If someone's thinking, gosh, I wonder how much brown fat I have, and maybe they've they've had a scan to look at the health of their heart before, and they've done a bone mineral density, a DEXA scan for bone mineral density, and they're thinking, is there a test out there that I can go and do that will quantify how much brown fat that I have, and then you can reference it against some sort of range and sort of work out whether you have a good amount or perhaps it's something that you need to work on. Does that exist?
No, it doesn't. So the thing is that brown fat is, it's defined as an organ, because it is really an organ in our body, but it's located different places, 6 places in the body. So it's not like we can take a blood sample and just say, well, because this marker is increased or something, then we know that there is a brown fat, and by that we cannot quantify how much we have, because, as I said, it's located 6 places in the body. As far as we know, there are really good studies from Leitner et al. From 2017, a study showing that if you do these kind of PET-CT scanning overlays, and people can afford PET-CT scanning, but if they can, then they can actually measure how much brown fat they have. But what we do, and what we did in my studies, is that you can inject your subjects in a trial with this glucose analog tracer, and that glucose, upon activation, so cold stimulus, is going to be taken up in the brown fat cells, and then you can, in a PET-CT scanner, see where is this glucose analog tracer located now. And if you have activated the brown fat, it's going to take up that glucose, and then we can see it on a PET-CT scannings. But PET-CT scannings are very expensive. So at this moment, we don't have a tool yet to measure how much brown fat each people have. But one thing that I have seen in my studies, and this is now I'm going to give you an example of what happened in one of my subjects, actually. So one of my winter swimmers didn't have any brown fat, and we saw that on the PET-CT scannings. But he reacted very differently on the cooling. And I cooled my subjects for multiple times, multiple days, just repeating the same experiment to see if I can repeat my results. And if I couldn't, then that's also results, of course, but that's going to show that maybe the brown fat is not that easy to activate, or it's not. So, but what we saw here was that this person who didn't have any brown fat, but was a winter swimmer, he was cold already from the beginning. So a person who gets easily cold and have a hard time getting warmed up again might not have that much brown fat. It could be that it's very correlated, you can say. So with time, when you expose yourself to the cold and you increase your brown fat efficiency in the cells, or more mitochondria in the cells, you will also physically get warmer or faster warmer. So maybe you can use that as like a everyday tool to see, like, okay, am I a very cold, physically a very cold person? Then you might not have as much brown fat, or maybe if you expose yourself to the cold and you still have a hard time heating yourself up, then it could be that you don't have that much. But if you feel the change, where you feel that you get warmer by time with adaptation or acclimation also from time to time, then you might actually have some brown fat. But we are in research trying to figure out if we can find markers for the brown fat in a blood sample. Mm-hmm. But we are not there yet.
Interesting. So someone like that was in your study, who I believe you said they were a winter swimmer, but they had very little brown fat. Can someone like that still, through repeated deliberate exposure, perhaps increasing frequency or duration, can they actually increase their brown fat stores?
So if you have very little, if you just have the brown fat, then you can increase it, but you can also make it more efficient. So like we saw in my study, that the amount of brown fat in the winter swimmer group didn't increase, but the efficiency of the cells increased. So they generated more heat. upon cold stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have that much brown fat, you can probably get warmer by increasing the efficiency of the cells and probably grow some more beige fat in your body. That is like a third type I'm just throwing in there, Simon, but we can talk about it, of course. But if you don't have any at all, if you are what we call BAT negative, so you don't have the tissue even, it is questionable, and we don't really have the answer yet, if you can transform your fat precursor cells, so baby fat cells, into a more beige kind of fat cells. So they will have the thermogenic capacity or ability to activate more than just a total white fat cell, the yellow fat cell. So we are still having some questions about this, and we don't really know. But this person or this subject I just referenced to from my own study, he didn't have any at all. So he was what I, in my study, call a BAT negative subject. He didn't have any.
Interesting. So with the cold exposure, we're activating the brown fat, the existing brown fat that whatever we have, and we can make that more efficient as an organ. What is it though that dictates how much brown fat we have? Is that a genetic thing that's determined by our genes?
Yeah, probably it's both genetics, but it's also environmental, and that is exactly why it is really good to study this and see if we can grow this brown fat in a natural way, because the brown fat is activated by cold. So it's very likely that we can grow some more brown fat if we just expose ourselves to the cold and we get over our fear for it, because this is actually something that is making us healthy. So we can grow more brown fat, but we need to expose ourselves to the cold and to the heat, because that is the most potent way of doing it, because it's connected with our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. And also there is a direct pathway from the skin directly to the brown fat. So it will be activated not only from the brain, but also directly from the skin to the brown fat. So the most potent way and is the cold and changing your environmental temperatures to keep yourself healthy in that way.
Interesting. So explain that again. So when we get into the cold, the first part of the story that I understood was noradrenaline is what it gets released. We went through that in response to getting into the cold. Then that activates the brown fat. But there's also a direct pathway from the skin to the brown fat.
Yes, there is a direct pathway also. So you can activate there are nerves going from your skin and directly releasing activation of the noradrenaline close to the brown fat. So there's like two pathways going, and there's actually also a pathway from the muscles. So there are different ways of the body to keep the brown fat activated in order to save us. So the muscles are helping by increasing also a hormone, so it will activate the brown fat. There is also the skin, and there is also the brain. So from multiple places in the body, the signal is sent to this central organ in our body to generate heat, because this is the only way our body can generate heat, that and the muscles.
Right. So it sort of pulls in glucose. It uses that to generate energy. That energy is heating us up, which is helping us in this scenario where we've just exposed our body to a very, very cold temperature. So if people are thinking, okay, that makes a lot of sense, I completely understand what the purpose of brown fat is and how it plays a different role to, say, white fat, which is mostly for storage of energy. You mentioned before, though, that brown fat makes us healthy. So if we kind of go beyond the acute setting where it's helping us warm up, what are the sort of more downstream health benefits that we get from having this brown fat working more efficiently?
So if we can activate our brown fat, we will lower our levels of glucose. And we have seen that in my results as well, where we see that if you have exposed yourself to the cold, you have a more efficient brown fat activation, a higher thermogenesis in the body, and that's going to clear your glucose from your bloodstream faster upon just one meal or one sugar drink. So you will have a faster metabolism. You will also have a lower insulin levels. So lower insulin production is associated with being healthier. So you really want to have a body which doesn't overproduce insulin, because that is a sign that your cells are not sensitive to insulin. And when you are insensitive to insulin, you are closer to getting both obese, but also getting type 2 diabetes, which is one of our big, huge and growing pandemic diseases in our world. So what we can do by activating the brown fat is a way to keep ourselves or preventing ourselves from lifestyle diseases down the road. So cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, all the major inflammatory diseases. So brown fat activation lowers inflammation in the body. And that has really some health benefits, both on physiology, but also on mental health, actually. So we know from studies that depression is associated with inflammation in the body. So we know that if you have high inflammation in the body, you also have a higher risk of developing depression. So it is really something that we can use to prevent lifestyle diseases.
Quick one. If you'd like some inspiration to take your fermented food game and gut health to the next level, be sure to check out my digital plant-based ferments guide. Inside are some of my favorite recipes, including my soy labneh and homemade kombucha. Learn more at theproof.com/ferments. That's theproof.com/ferments. Has anyone looked at a sort of cohort of winter swimmers and looked sort of prospectively over time at the incidence of disease? Are people that are getting out there in Denmark or in Bondi in the winter, wherever they're located, and they're doing that regularly, do they have lower incidence of type 2 diabetes? Are they less likely to be overweight or obese? Do we have any data on that?
Oh, I love that question. But no, we don't actually. We don't have that on a long term. And we need studies showing what happens down the road in 20, 30 years. And even though we will not have the results right now, this is definitely something we should do. But we have some other results that we can maybe lean to and look to. And that is a sauna cohort of sauna bathers from Finland. A study was conducted or started up in the 80s, where they have followed now the sauna bathers from Finland, more than 2,000 to 3,000 sauna bathers, and they are up to almost 25 or 30 years now. And they have published regularly some studies showing the association of going into heat, and they also use the cold. They roll in the snow or they jump into the lake and stuff like that. So they do the contrast therapy, which is also my research and what I talk about. So doing this kind of like alternation between the cold and the heat shows in this sauna cohort study, and now I'm going to point to a study they published in 2015 where they show how much sauna you should use. There's a higher threshold, and also how many times per week to see the benefits. And they also find how much you shouldn't cross or do too much, because that's gonna then lower the benefits again. So there seems to be a higher threshold, and that is what we also need. If we just want to look at the cold without the heat, then we need a cohort study for this as well.
What was that upper level of sauna exposure that they found was associated with benefit?
Very interesting study showing association in this observational study shows that if you go into the sauna 2 to 3 times per week, you will lower your risk of cardiovascular diseases with 27%. And if you then go into the sauna 4 to 7 times per week, you will lower this by 40%. And also it shows that you will lower your risk of early death by 30% if you can go every day or four times at least per week. But I think that it's important to say regarding this study that the control group were actually also sauna bathers. And I think that's something that we always need to debate a bit when we look at these observational studies. And we really need the observational studies because you cannot do a randomized controlled trial over 30 years. That's not really feasible, I would say. But these observational studies show that the sauna bathers who did 2 times per week in the sauna and in the cold, and up to 7 times, were then compared to the control group who did 1 time per week. So they were the phenotype who also chose to do sauna. So I think it's very, they see this dose-response relationship of more sauna and more health benefits and lower risk of dying too early. But there seem to be this higher threshold as well. So if you exceed the 7 times per week, so if you go more than once every day, there seems to be a too much strainer on the cardiovascular system, and then you increase your risk of cardiovascular diseases again. So that is where we talked about hormesis just before, and the phases where it's not healthy anymore, and it becomes chronic stress. So you can also expose yourself to these kind of healthy stressors too much, and then it becomes too hard on your cells and your system. And if you overdo, like if you go over 30 minutes per session in the sauna, it seems also that that's going to plateau out the benefits and maybe even increase the risks again on cardiovascular diseases.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I was wondering whether they quantified the actual number of minutes per session, or if they were just looking at days of week exposure, or did they offer any kind of suggestions or recommendations for the number of minutes per session?
Yes. So it seems that if you go from 10 minutes and up to 19 minutes, you see the most beneficial window, you can say, for minutes. So 10 to 19 minutes was very beneficial. And if you go from 19 to 30 minutes, it seems that there is a small increase in benefit, meaning lower risk of cardiovascular disease. But if you go over 30, then it seems that the benefits plateau out at least. So you can go up to 30 if you can sit that long in a sauna. But you really don't have to. Up to 19 minutes seems to be best. But if we look at my studies, my research publication from 2021 shows that if you do this 57 minutes per week, divided on 2 to 3 days, and you divide that into minutes per day you go, and every day you go 2 times into the sauna, then you would only need to be in the sauna for 10 to 15 minutes per session. And that, I think that if we look to the Finnish cohort study, I think that it corresponds to what they also have found, so minute-wise, to what is beneficial. So that is also why I call this 57 minutes in the sauna per week divided on 2 to 3 days, is kind of a sweet spot maybe, where we know this is a safe zone, this is healthy for you, you can do this because that's going to show some beneficial effects on your metabolism.
Okay, so 10 or 15 minutes and doing a couple of those rounds, and then that's twice a week, which adds up to somewhere around an hour or 57 minutes, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I know I say 57 minutes, but people should not think about this as like 57 minutes when we say it's just because in research you need to be very precise. So if I go out and say 1 hour and you cannot find 60 minutes in a publication, then it's the question, is this the right publication she is referring to? That's why I say 57 minutes, because you can find it in a publication then.
So just quickly on that, I'm thinking about logistics and also someone's tolerance levels is another option. So you could do 15 minutes in the sauna, have a break or get into cold, and then come back and do another 15 minutes. And you could do that twice a week, which is an hour of sauna. Would it be just as effective if someone, let's say they didn't have that much time per session, or for whatever reason they didn't want to do the two kind of rounds? Would it be just as effective if you did 15 minutes of sauna on 4 days?
Yeah, I think you can divide this into what fits your program, and I always say that if it's better to do something than nothing. So if you have time to go for 1 or 2 sessions per week, that's fine, and the body is very good at remembering thermal stress. So if you have a pause in your sauna sessions or in winter swimming for months even, the body will still remember your adaptation. So it's not like you lose the benefits just because you skip a week. But if you can do a couple of rounds per week, that's gonna help your metabolism a lot. So go as much as you can, but think about not overdoing it, because I think that is more dangerous for your body, overdoing it, than not doing it actually. So I think it's very important that we talk about this beneficial window, and that is like what I also studied, this micro-stressing.
So today it's very popular to go between extreme hot to extreme cold. And in fact, not just today, this has been around for many, many hundreds of years. But is there something about exposing your body to that extreme temperature at either end of the scale in the sort of same session, going directly from one to the other, that is particularly beneficial or sort of accentuates, let's say, the benefits of hot therapy or cold therapy on their own?
I think that we have many physiology studies showing what's going on in the body when you expose yourself to cold water immersion, and also to sauna sessions. But I think that my research in contrast therapy is probably what we actually have right now to show the benefits, which is most rigid setup to explore exactly that. And we definitely need more studies on the contrast therapy, in my opinion. But my studies show that if you go from the cold to the heat and back and forth, you will have this increase in your metabolism, and also increase in efficiency in your brown fat. So I think that it's difficult to compare the different studies in between. I think that if we need to address that question exactly, then we need a study where we look at a cold group and a sauna group who only does that, and then compare to the contrast to show that. But I think that if we look what happens in the cells when we go into the cold, you will have an increase in mitochondria over time. And using the sauna, you will exercise, you can say, the efficiency of those mitochondria. So it's not that what happens in the stress proteins in the cells from the cold is going to correspond exactly to what happens in the heat. So I think that there's what is going on in the cells, which repair the cells, is different in the cold from the heat. And in that way, they have like this overlapping and also contributing ways of increasing our health. So heat stress and cold stress are acting differently and activating different stress proteins in our cells, which repair our cells and makes them younger.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned metabolism a couple of times. And so we've spoken about getting into the cold. Brown fat generates this heat. It raises the body's core temperature. In order to produce this heat, energy is required. You can't create heat out of nothing. So a question that you probably get quite a bit, does this mean my metabolism increases and the energy that I use over a day will be higher if I get into cold water? And can this have a kind of clinically meaningful effect on my body fat levels?
Yeah, I think that we have quite a lot of studies, both in mice studies and also in humans, and also my recent results show that you increase your metabolism when you go into the cold, and you get adapted to the cold as well. You increase the mitochondria in the brown fat cells, which will then clear the glucose and fat from your bloodstream, and that's going to keep you both warmer, but also keep your metabolism up. So you be more responsive of changes in cold in temperature, which is going to increase your metabolism. So you will have a faster metabolism, and that's going to keep you healthier. If you're going to lose weight, is very much depending on if you can keep the balance of intake and also how much you eat, of course, because when people's metabolism go up, they tend to also eat more. So of course, this is always a balance, of course, but you increase your metabolism and you also increase calorie burning. So in that way, it is keeping you your metabolism healthier. But if you will lose directly weight on the scale, that is something that we don't know yet. If we can find like a protocol for how much cold do we need to do with a very restrict or controlled diet, will we be able to see that on a weight scale? So we haven't seen those studies yet, but we do see that if we test this in mice, that they increase their metabolism and they burn a lot of calories just for a short amount of cold exposure and over a short amount of time. So you can fast get your metabolism going into the cold and also the heat.
In your study, where I believe it was 11 minutes of cold exposure over the week, right? Did you look at the kind of magnitude of change with regards to metabolism? Are we talking about if someone's doing, let's say, 11 minutes of ice bath plunging a week, the average person, will they increase their kind of daily burn by sort of 50 calories or 100 or 300? Do we have any kind of idea of that?
No, not yet. We don't have the results for that, and I'm not aware of a study yet that is measuring exactly that. I think that a study like that would be very good and very needed, but we don't have an exact number. If you go into the cold water for this amount of minutes, you burn this amount of calories, because it's also a very difficult calculation, because it's also who are you studying. It's going to be a group which is very homogenic group. So we have the same subjects, almost phenotype and also body composition. So we can do this in research, of course, and we need these studies to see how much do you burn from 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes in the cold water. And that would be very interesting. But we know from my studies that if you do this over several winter swimming seasons, so I tested this in trained winter swimmers, so they have been swimming for at least 2 winter swimming seasons. So on a long term, we do see some effects on their metabolism. But we also need to see what happens acutely after just a few minutes. That would be very interesting in the future to see that.
So this heat production from brown fat is non-shivering thermogenesis, but the body can also heat itself up through shivering, which I'm sure everyone or most people have experienced at some point. Do we see people that have less brown fat, do they shiver more when they're exposed to cold? Do they kind of make up for their reduced capability to do non-shivering thermogenesis by just shivering more as a kind of method to heat themselves up?
Yes, exactly. That is what's going on. So you have these two kind of tissues in the body that can increase your thermogenesis. So you have the brown fat. If you have brown fat, that is going to be activated first. But if you are lacking that organ, just like you said, then we would need the other one to activate and keep you warm. So if you easily shiver, it might be also showing that you are not exposing yourself. That could be one reason. You are not exposing yourself to the cold, which means that no matter if you have brown fat or not, you are going to activate your muscles to shiver and generate heat very much faster than one who is adapted to the cold and therefore very efficient brown fat. So the window for keeping the shivering away is much shorter for a person who is not adapted to the cold. So it could be showing that you are not exposed to the cold, or it could be showing that you are you don't have that much brown fat. If you don't have that much brown fat, you will start shivering almost immediately when you get cold. So I know people who do that. Actually, I don't know if you have ever met one, but you can totally tell if a person has a low threshold for cold. They easily get cold and they shiver very fast. And I just mentioned before the subject in my studies who didn't have any brown fat, and he shivered immediately as I started cooling him down. He was so different from the other group, the other winter swimmers in the group. So the faster you start shivering, the less thermogenesis or non-shivering thermogenesis you get from your brown fat. But you can increase this if you have brown fat. You can increase this with exposing yourself to the cold. But if you don't have any brown fat, then you can also increase the efficiency of your muscle cells to increase thermogenesis, so heat in your body.
So this also, I guess, ties back to your recommendations that I've read, where possible, if you're doing this for metabolic health purposes particularly, to finish in the cold and let your body heat itself up as opposed to finishing in the hot.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things that I figured out while I was doing my field studies in Denmark, where I was traveling around and just wanted to observe what do winter swimmers in Denmark do. And some of them ended in the sauna, and some of them went home after the cold dip. And I was just puzzled by that. I was like, okay, so why do some go in the sauna and why do some end in the cold water? And I just figured out, I need to figure out what happens when you go into the cold. And because I was studying the brown fat, I was figuring, well, if you want to have the most out of this from a metabolic perspective, you will benefit from heating yourself up naturally. If you end on cold, you will activate your brown fat and keep it activated for hours afterwards. And that's going to increase your metabolism. So why not just do that? I mean, it could be a little bit difficult in the beginning, but very fast you will get used to it and your body gets super fast at heating up by itself. So I tried it because I also didn't have access to a sauna. So if you don't have that, you're going to end on cold no matter what. But just don't go into a hot shower. That is something that I try also to tell people, because that's going to make your core temperature drop even faster. It's what's called the after drop. Which happens after you have been into a cold plunge or you've been winter swimming.
Explain that again. So what's the after drop, and what were you saying there about not going into a hot shower?
Yeah, so I always say you should end on cold to increase your metabolism, and that is also a natural way for the body to heat itself up. That's gonna also increase the neurotransmitters in your brain, because everything will still be activated, and it's just good for your overall health. But if you are freezing a lot and you are very tempted then to go home and go in the hot shower, I think that some people out there might have tried this, but if you stand in the hot shower after your cold dip and you keep the water on the warm water, and you stand there, you are very cold on the surface, because of the hot water hitting your skin, the heat receptors is going to send a signal to the brain saying, in your temperature regulating center in hypothalamus, will then sense that now you are getting very hot. And that's going to open your blood vessels, which then will send the warm blood from your core to your peripheral tissue. And that's going to decrease the temperature of that blood, and then that will be sent back to your core, where the temperature receptors in your core will then send a signal to your brain saying, wow, now this blood is getting very cold, and you have a drop in your core temperature. And that doesn't really feel that nice, I would say. Sometimes it's very severe and you start really shivering in the shower. And other times you just have the feeling of like not getting warm, and you just keep increasing the heat, and you just keep thinking, why am I getting colder? It feels colder. It's because your blood is circulating and trying to even out the temperature. It's not that it's dangerous. It's not like that. It's just a not very pleasant experience, I think, that when you feel that quick after drop in your core temperature. You will be faster at heating yourself up if you just end on cold and then keep moving and don't just go home and sit on your couch, because that is also gonna increase your after drop. So I write about this in my book, and I call it like minimizing your after drop by moving, exercising, or go home and clean. Just make sure that you are moving your body.
Okay, so get in the cold or finish in the cold, and don't jump into the heat, and don't sit down. Keep moving and allow your body to heat itself back up. That's for maximum benefit from a metabolic health point of view.
Yes.
And thinking about metabolic health here and really healthy aging, often what comes up here, or another sort of hot topic at the moment, is preservation of muscle tissue as we age. Very important for our metabolic health. And it acts as a glucose sink. And so I'm drawing a lot of parallels here, because the brown fat you're talking about also being able to help manage blood glucose levels too, and it's its own organ, which I didn't fully appreciate. So it kind of seems like as we're aging, we should be thinking about protecting the brown fat stores or helping them to work more efficiently, just as we would go to the gym and work out a muscle to make that more efficient, and so that we build strength. We can do similar things to help protect this brown fat organ. When we think of building muscle, we think of a concept called progressive overload. So we have to go into the gym and constantly increase sets or reps or weight in order to challenge the body so that it continues to adapt. Is that a similar idea here? Do we, with cold exposure, to continue to derive benefits, do we have to be changing things, temperature or duration, or constantly kind of challenging the body in the way that we're using this practice?
Yes, I like that question. Also because this is one of my principles, or one of my philosophies, that if we change the temperature and we keep changing, I call it the cold and heat training center for your muscles, for all your cells and systems in your body. So you should see the temperature as the weight that you put on your training, on your bar. And if you keep the same temperature, so the same weight on your bar, you won't challenge your cells, and you need to keep challenging the cells so it will keep itself activated, and also increase the mitochondria and also stress proteins in the cells, will repair the cells and make them young and vital. So if you can change the temperature, that is definitely, in my opinion, something that is gonna keep your cells younger and make them grow in mitochondria, and that is what you want. You want mitochondrial growth in your cells to keep yourself healthy and younger, because this is, of course, for longevity and better life quality, and also decreasing the risk of cardiovascular diseases. And just like you said, in the muscles, you want to change the weight to grow muscles, but also to increase mitochondria in the cells. So that is why I say that changing the temperatures in the cold and also in the heat, and also maybe how long time you use it, is gonna challenge your cells. So you don't have to go into cold water that is 0 degrees. I really don't think that this is necessary. There are studies showing that you could go into cold water that is 20 degrees Celsius, or you can stand in the cold wind for 19 degrees and sleep in a cold room at 19 degrees Celsius, which we just touched upon in the beginning. And that is also going to activate your brown fat. So you don't have to go extremely cold. You don't have to do directly ice bath, to have these beneficial effects. Actually, in Denmark, we very rarely have ice on our water. So our swimming in nature is almost always in just floating water. So there's no ice in our water. Our water keeps changing in temperature. So if you have nature, and I think this is very beautiful, because if you have nature and you have a sea or a lake, then you don't have to think so much about this, because the seasons is going to change the temperature for you. So the nature is the perfect place, the perfect training center for your thermoregulation. And I think that you asked about this for the future and for getting older and healthier as we age. I think that we need to train our thermogenesis, training our temperature sensitivity, or train our temperature. Our sensitivity to temperature. Sorry, that's definitely gonna help us keep our brown fat alive, and that is also one thing that we know from published literature, that when you get over the age of 40, the brown fat amount is going to decrease with age. So we know that as we age, that the mitochondrial function, not only in our brown fat cells, but also in our muscles, is going to decrease. But that is definitely also applies to the brown fat. But we don't know if obesity, or you could say the increase in obesity, which we also see from the age of 40 is going up, if the obesity increase after 40 years of age is what's going to determine that you have less brown fat, or it's because we lose the brown fat and that's why we get obese. And that's kind of like what came first here. So maybe it's something it's maybe both, actually. But we want to keep it alive. That's why I say use it or lose it. That is definitely something that people understand and people would apply to if they think about the muscles, because we know more about training our muscles than we do about training our brown fat.
Mm-hmm. So with training our muscles, I guess people can get an objective kind of look into how they're going. You can see that you're lifting more weight. You might even see the muscle in the mirror. That's always nice. But with this, what are some signals that someone can look for? So if they're really inspired by what you're saying and they decide, I'm going to deliberately put my body into cold, what kind of things can they keep an eye on to know that they're progressing, that they might be increasing their brown fat stores or increasing the efficiency of their brown fat?
Yeah, I really like that question, because when you go to the gym and you look in the mirror, you can see maybe that something is happening, and that is going to motivate you, and that's going to encourage you to come again and look in the mirror again and train in front of the mirror. And you could go home and you can put new clothes on and you think, oh, it fits better now. But it's quite different with an organ that is located close to your central nervous system. I'm just going to tell you where the brown fat is, just so people know why you cannot see it in that way. So the brown fat depot is located 6 places in the body, as far as we know, but it's around our central nervous system. And our biggest depot is located just under our supraclavicular bones. So I'm just going to point to it in this video. So it's here. And in my study, we measured how close to the surface it is, and it's just 1-2 millimeters under the skin. So you can almost touch your brown fat here. But as it grows or it gets more efficient, you're not going to be able to see it. But what you can maybe is feel if you get more comfortable in the cold. So if you, for example, are going outside and you're didn't close your jacket, or you feel more comfortable when you start your cold water plunges, if you start to get adapted and increase your metabolism, increase your brown fat, then you should also get more comfortable in the cold, whether that is plunging in the cold water or walking outside. So you can use the comfort in the cold as a measure for that. If you get easier warm from exposing yourself to the cold, that is probably a measure of you getting more adapted and getting more efficient brown fat cells. So that's the best measure that we have, that we can use. But I also think that it is a very efficient measure, actually. So feeling that you are a less cold person physically, and feeling that you can increase your own heat faster, has for me been a very good reason for me to do winter swimming, because that is definitely helping me in my everyday life. Not only just feeling that I can overcome this fear of going into the cold and it's very uncomfortable, and if I can do that, I can push that bar of being uncomfortable or being comfortable in the uncomfortable situation, but it's also helping me understand my own body better and seeing that I can actually get warmer and I can be warmer. It has just helped me a lot in my everyday, that I don't feel as cold anymore. So for me, it's a good reason to use the cold.
Yeah, that's good feedback. So it's not just your ability to warm yourself up while you're in the cold water.
No.
But translating that to everyday life, away from the winter swimming or from the ice bath, how is your body regulating its temperature?
Yeah, exactly. It's more stable, it seems. My studies show that if you look at the temperature curves from my winter swimmers, we can see that their temperature is more stable, and they have a higher temperature, you can say a higher activation of the brown fat, also during just room temperature. So they have this, and it's more constant. So you can see that they have a more efficient regulation of the temperature balance in the body, whereas people who are not exposing themselves to the cold, they have these excursions going a little bit more up and down, fluctuations in temperature in the body. So it's showing that the brown fat and also the muscles are getting very efficient, like at completely getting you into that temperature where you are neutral, because the body also just wants to be comfortable, right? So the body goes for comfortable and you expose yourself to the uncomfortable, and that is where the body gets efficient at trying to save you from that stressful situation.
Are there any gender differences here with regards to where the brown fat is, or how much men versus women say have? I'm thinking in the sort of top of my mind that myself, I've experienced this, but also I've had friends who are in relationships where at nighttime there's a bit of an argument about the room temperature, and not always, but often the female wants it to be a bit warmer.
Yeah.
And I'm probably generalizing here, so I realize this is not the case for everyone, but in my experience and through talking to others, it seems like it's fairly common that men seem to want the room cooler. And I'm curious, is that explained potentially by the amount of brown fat that men have?
It's a very good question. It has something to do with so women actually have more brown fat than men. And this has puzzled me for a while, and I write about it in my second book. Sorry, I didn't figure it out in my first book, but women have more brown fat than men. And what I think is interesting is that, why does that make sense? Why would nature make sure that we have more brown fat as women? But if we then look at the ratio to amount of muscle mass, you would see that we know that men have more muscle mass than women. And because they have more muscle mass, they also have a higher capacity or higher ability to increase their heat from muscles. Women also have smaller hearts compared to men. meaning they have a harder time getting blood circulation and blood to the fingers and to the toes and to the ears. So if we look at studies who have measured the temperature of hands and feet and ears, we see that women have lower temperature in a peripheral temperature than men have. So we have another, you could say, a temperature regulating system, which means that we would probably need more brown fat to keep us warm, because our muscle mass is not corresponding to the men. Which means, then I've looked into this because I really wanted to find out whether this is true or not, because I've heard the same stories, and I know for a fact from my own experience at home that my husband wants the temperature a little bit lower than I would prefer. Today we are like on the same level, because now I'm a winter swimmer, I'm a really warm person today. And that discussion is not going on anymore, but it used to be like that. I want it on 24 degrees Celsius and he wants the room temperature at 22. And when you then look into the literature, that is exactly where we are, what we call temperature comfortable. So men are temperature comfortable at 22 degrees Celsius in a room, and women are at 24. And it's quite a difference. If we turn the heater down to 22, then the women have to use their brown fat to activate a little bit more than in men. So it could be because of environmental causes that we have more brown fat, but it's probably also because we need it, because we still need the same core temperature as men. So if you measure my core temperature, it's probably around 36.8 or 9 or something like that. And if you measure yours, it's around the same, right? So we definitely need some kind of activation for our temperature. So I think that could be an explanation. That is just my explanation. Yeah.
Did you just settle the argument, the friendly argument for everyone? Is that the Susanna Soeberg final say on room temperature? Is it 22 degrees?
22 degrees, yeah. But I mean, maybe we could meet on 23.
Okay. Yeah, that would seem reasonable. Quick one. A lot of people ask me for tips on buying supplements and getting blood tests. I've created zero-cost guides for both of these, which you can download from my website, theproof.com. Okay, so you've mentioned inflammation and the immune system a couple of times here. I think it would be interesting to double-click on that. How does deliberate cold exposure affect our immune system, if at all?
Yeah, so we know from studies in old physiology studies already, dating back to the 70s and up until today, that if you expose a person to a cold water immersion, and if this person is new to cold water immersion, then you will have a rapid increase in the white blood cells and the macrophages in your immune system, meaning that you have an activation of your immune system. And that helps on your inflammation, right? That will decrease the inflammation. But this increase in immune system that is measurable in a blood sample is higher when you are a new winter swimmer or a new cold water dipper plunger. Has many names. But it seems that when you get adapted to the cold water, so by adaptation, you won't see this increase in white blood cells as high as when you started your journey. So that might show, and we have debated this a bit in my studies as well, because in my winter swimmers we do see that the white blood cells and especially the white blood cells are not as high as in the control group. But this might be a feedback that is because you don't have that much inflammation in the body. So when you decrease the inflammation in the body because you have an increase in white blood cells and macrophage, which is going to clean up all this inflammation, and because of nitric oxide, that is going to increase the blood circulation, and also making the blood vessels dilate and contract. You will have a cleaning up, you can say, of your blood vessels for inflammation, and with time you won't need that high immune response to keep your inflammation down. So the more, you can say it in another way, so if you have more inflammation in the body, you also have a high activation of your immune system all the time, and that might show that you have all this inflammation in your body. But cold exposure decreases your inflammation, and therefore in time you will see this lower immune response. So some think that, then it means that you are destroying your immune system, and that is not the case at all. It's just responding to what's going on in your body. Your immune response is just responding, right? So if there's no need for a high level of leukocytes in your body, then it doesn't really need to be there. So it's probably a response to that. But it's also, if you look at the outcome of having a better immune system, a better regulation of your immune system, then we see from studies in cold showers, it's a study from Amsterdam, where they had tested whether a cold shower a day of 30 seconds up to 90 seconds will decrease the sick days that they have during a month. And they did see that, I think it was 3 months actually, but they did see that people had less sick days when they go into cold showers, 30 seconds or up to 90 seconds, and after that it didn't really matter. But we did see that in that study, and I think why I mentioned this is because I think it's interesting that you, with very short amount, can activate your immune response and actually feel also better or positive enough to go to work. It could be because of activation of the immune system, but it could also be because of all the positive neurotransmitters that is going on in your brain, and you feel more drive, you feel more energy, and you don't feel as sick, so you can actually go to work. So it could be both actually, but I think the important thing is the message. The message is that you feel less sick at least, and enough to get to work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the important message for anyone who owns a business and has lots of staff is find out a way to get your staff having cold showers.
Yes, exactly.
Productivity might go up.
Yeah.
So chronic inflammation, I think a lot of people will have heard or will appreciate. It's a hallmark feature of many different chronic lifestyle diseases, including some of the neurodegenerative ones that you mentioned earlier. So I think most people are sort of on board that it's a good thing to not have chronic inflammation kind of lingering in the background. But one time or context where inflammation can be beneficial is in a more acute sort of scenario. Say you get injured, or perhaps more relevant here is in the context of training. So if you're going to the gym and doing resistance training and you're wanting to promote these kind of positive adaptations where you become stronger or you build muscle, I have read in a few places that the cold water exposure after exercise could attenuate some of the benefits. Is that something that you've seen or given any thought to?
Yes, I think that in some degree, yes, I've seen that. And I think it makes sense, because when you expose yourself to cold right after and you can call it an injury almost, when you go and train and you use your muscles, you create a local inflammation in those muscles, and you kind of need that inflammation to happen because you need the muscles to grow, and when you rupture that's gonna make the muscles bigger. So you need that process going if you want to create hypertrophy. But if you don't care about that, of course, then you can go into the code and then you will stop that process. So my recommendations are that if you are competing, for example, if you're training for a competition or you have many competitions within a short amount of time, then you can use the cold to make your muscles less sore, and that's going to help you in the competition. But if you are a person who just want to train to get healthy and you're not looking for hypertrophy, then I think that you can also use the cold. But if you are exactly looking for growing muscles and bodybuilding, then I think, and it's very important for you to get every detail of everything from every minute of your training, and you want to grow your muscles, then you could just use your cold plunges on another day, or maybe 3-4 hours after your training. So you don't do it right after, but I don't know how much this is going to affect your muscle growth, to be honest. I don't know if it's just minimal, but I think I've seen people out there saying, oh no, we shouldn't do the cold plunges because it's not good for hypertrophy. And I'm like, well, I really don't see that it's that much, actually, to be honest. I don't know if it's really that big a concern.
It would be interesting to see, I guess, how clinically meaningful it is. And some people don't have the flexibility to kind of choose where they're going to put their deliberate cold exposure during the day, because people only have so many hours in the day to fit all of this stuff in. I was probably more thinking about the 40, 50, 60-year-old who is really trying to work hard in the gym to preserve muscle, to avoid sarcopenia and just stay strong. And so I was coming at it, I guess, less from a bodybuilding perspective and about the aesthetics, but more from, let's just say someone had the flexibility and they could position their strength training or resistance training in their deliberate cold exposure wherever across their day. What interested me was I'd seen some of that research suggesting that going straight into ice afterwards could blunt some of the good inflammation, like you said. And I'd heard people, and again, I don't know how well this has been formally studied, but I'd heard people talking about, well, maybe you do your ice exposure, cold exposure first in the morning as something that you do before you exercise. Have you come across that kind of theory?
I haven't seen a study on it, but in theory, I would suggest that you do it earlier on the day, because you also activate your sympathetic nervous system, and you will have the activation of your of noradrenaline, adrenaline, and cortisol. So all the stress hormones increase, and that's going to give you energy and focus and drive right after. And if you do that earlier on the day, you can take that energy throughout the day and use that. But if you do it later on the day, then you could have problems sleeping, or maybe if you do it right before bedtime. Some people actually sleep better before when they do ice plunging before, so it's also not something that we know exactly, but it's definitely for energy, I would say, do the ice bath or cold showers earlier on the day, and before training is a really good thing. It's just like 4 cups of coffee. Maybe it corresponds to that, right? Taking a cold plunge or a cold shower. Actually, I saw a woman in the training center the other day, and I know because she's going on the same training team as I am, and she went to the cold shower before, and I was like, and the funny thing is that I went on a Danish podcast, and I said on a podcast that if you want to have more energy to do better training, have a better training session, then take a cold shower before you hit the gym. And she said, I just heard on a podcast that a researcher said this, and I was like, I didn't tell her it was me, but it was so funny. I was like looking at her like, okay, good idea. I said.
Yeah.
And she said, and it works. I feel so energetic, and I think it's very good to do that instead of 4 cups of coffee. Yeah, you can do both. Maybe
that's when you know your message is getting out there. When it comes back to you like that, that's always a good sign. On the cold shower before bed, I actually have heard, and this is anecdotal. I did try and look up if there'd been any studies on this. I couldn't find any, but I had heard from women postmenopausal or going through, it might be perimenopause, who are experiencing hot flashes and other kind of symptoms of that period, that transition, and anecdotally had found the cold shower before bed to be helpful. So that's another kind of interesting anecdote. There seems to be plenty here for studies to go out and
yes.
explore in so many different populations. You've mentioned a few times stress, anxiety, and in the book you say the cold makes you feel great during good times, but even better in bad times. And I shared a study with you a couple of days ago. A friend of mine, Paul Taylor, actually brought that to my attention. And that study was looking at, I think, 5 minutes in water that was 20 degrees Celsius. So not particularly cold, still cold, but not hugely cold. And that 5 minutes left people feeling more inspired, alert, and proud. Unpack this for us, what we understand about cold therapy, cold exposure, and what's happening from a physiological point of view that can affect the way that we feel mentally.
Yeah, I think this is actually a very important part of what we can get out of our cold exposure and temperature changes, the temperature regulation, why this could be very interesting also for the future. And we definitely need more studies on this. But what happens when you expose yourself to the cold is that you have a huge increase of noradrenaline, 2.5-fold it increases after just a few minutes going into the cold water. And these results are not new or anything. This dates back also to the older physiology studies from the 70s. So we have a lot of studies showing that the noradrenaline goes up. But dopamine also increases in the brain, and about the same level, and also within a few minutes. So this increase in dopamine and noradrenaline will help your mental balance in that way, where it gives you drive, it gives you energy, and it gives you that feeling of that you can get more alert and attentive to the world, and this connection with the world again when you have all these neurotransmitters going on in your brain. And increase in oxytocin actually also goes on, and increase in serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that increases because you have activated your parasympathetic nervous system. So that gives you mental balance. And way to get all these beneficial effects from that you get from just this one very short amount of time going into cold water, I think that this is amazing. That you can do this for such a short amount of time, and then suddenly you have all this positivity going on in your body. And that is because you exposed yourself to something that is a bit toxic for the body. We should definitely talk about the cold as something toxic. It is not something that we naturally just want to go into. We do this we use it as something that we were born into. But when we go into the cold and take these cold plunges, our body is screaming, don't do it, because it's dangerous and it's uncomfortable. And so we shouldn't act like this is the most natural thing to do, because it's not. But we are exposing our advice on going on and use it a little bit is because it is helping our metabolism, helping our cells, it's helping our mental balance, that we shock our cells very shortly, and it keeps our brain alert and in the presence. And I think this is something that we can use for the future. People having trouble with depression and anxiety and attention is also something that is becoming a huge problem and growing problem, and probably because of all the devices and the technology that we have today that are distracting us, and we are not getting better at training our brain at being attentive to something. So I think the study that you just mentioned before is very interesting regarding that. The study have looked at 33 men and women, and as you said, they put them into 20 degrees Celsius water for 5 minutes, body baths, they call them, up to the neck. And they measured brain connectivity and self-reported emotional state before and after the cold water immersion. So the results showed that they got more active and also are more alert and attentive, and they felt proud and less distressed and nervous after the cold water immersion. So these are the positive things that they've associated with these positive emotions, with coupling that with brain. They made these functional
MRI, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It was MRI scans where they looked at the brain, where it was active, and they could see that the emotions of the positive emotions were activated and the negative emotions were decreased, actually. So if we then take these results and compare those to what happens in our physiology, that actually corresponds very much to an increase in dopamine, an increase in noradrenaline, and also serotonin, but also oxytocin. There are studies in mice which shows that if we take mice and expose them to cold water immersion, they will have an increase in oxytocin, which is our love hormone, right? It's our love drug in our body. And usually we don't think about oxytocin as something that is increased in the cold water, but I have found studies that shows this, and I think it's very beautiful, and it also shows, or it explains why we feel this connection afterwards. And now I'm coming back to the club thing, so which is also increasing our mental health. Increasing our oxytocin level from going into the cold water will make you more connecting with other people. So it increases your social skills. Increase in oxytocin makes you better connecting with other people, but also with yourselves and also with nature as you are in the nature, right? So people say, I feel so connected with nature when I go winter swimming. I also feel so connected with people that I go swimming with. And I also feel very good and proud. And they also found the word proud as something that increases in this study from 2023. So it's a recent study. So I think it really comes together, these results and also the neurotransmitters in the brain. So we can probably talk about the positive emotions increasing from going into the cold water. And from a perspective of mental health for the future, I think this is definitely a way. I hope that more studies will come, and I think that we should go this way, definitely.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether anyone has looked at, so clearly there is an increase in dopamine, noradrenaline, oxytocin. I wonder what that curve looks like. So if I plunge and I do a minute in 5 or 6 degrees and I get a spike in these neurotransmitters, like how long lasting is that? And does it, let's say I'm someone that's suffering from depression or anxiety, is it enough of an effect, a kind of pulse or wave of these neurotransmitters to have some sort of clinically meaningful effect?
I think that we are talking about this in a preventive way of like trying to increase our positive mindset. And I think that curing depression and curing anxiety, curing panic attacks or lowering the level of them or the amount of them is another way. It's curing a disease, you can say. But what happens when you go into the cold water is also that you decrease your inflammation. And when you decrease the inflammation and you increase your positive mindset, my analysis of this would be that if you are depressed, then you will get less depressed. But we need clinical studies to explore this more on the pathology, because it could be that some, which we will also, I think we're going to learn this in the future. So studies in physical activity, for example, we don't go and give the same advice to all groups of people in our society for physical activity. Some people we say train like this because you are categorized maybe in this group. You could be, if you have some For example, if you are also for diet and stuff. So if you are obese, if you have type 2 diabetes, then be aware of this and you can train like this. That will be good for you. If you are lean and healthy, then you can do this. That will be good for you. And also if you have different body compositions, maybe anaerobe fitness would be better for you or more beneficial at your state. So I think in the future we will learn more about what kind of cold exposure would benefit different groups and amount of time and how cold and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get some promising results, because I mean, depression, anxiety, they're so complex, and really the more tools and options that can be of benefit potentially to people, the better. So I hope that people are looking into that.
They are. I know that, because there was actually a group in England, and I just want to pop that in because it's really, and I also have put that in my book. There is a case study with a young woman who used cold water as a way of getting mentally over her depression, and she used heavily much medicine to cure her depression or lower the depression, at least the symptoms. But after 3 months of cold water swimming, she could actually get rid of all her pills, and she got out of this medical fog that she felt she was in. And these researchers from the UK who published this case study, they followed her through a whole year, and they saw this positive change as a case study for also maybe looking more into if depression or anxiety could be cured with this kind of physical activity going into the cold water. So I think there's already something out there that is pushing it in the hypothesis in that direction, where we can get some clinical trials on this.
What about other brain-related conditions like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, or even traumatic brain injuries? Given the, I guess, the changes that are occurring in the brain when you go into cold water therapy, the changes in neurotransmitters like dopamine, I'm wondering if this is something that you've thought about or seen in the literature.
Yeah, so there are no studies on this for only the cold, but there's some associations to lowering the risk of Alzheimer's disease if you go into sauna, using sauna and also alternating to the cold. That is going to decrease the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, and that is shown in these observational studies from Finland in these cohort studies. So if we can see that from using the heat, I am thinking that we might also see that from the cold, because cold stress and heat stress, that is just stress for the body, and doing a little bit amount of that is going to increase our health, both physically and mentally. But we don't have it from the cold.
Let's finish with some practical stuff here. So people can think about the application. I think they'll be inspired to walk away from here and try it out if they haven't already. If someone has access to a lake or, let's say, an ocean, and they said to you, look, I just want you to give me some advice, some first-time advice. I'm a bit fearful of cold, to be honest. I really couldn't think of anything worse, but I understand that there could be some health benefits here up for grabs. What time of the day am I doing this? Does that matter? What season? And to begin with, am I kind of just running in and running out, or jumping off a pier and jumping out? Like, how should I approach this as a beginner?
Yes, first of all, I am totally with you, I would say to that person, because I've been there and I've been a person who just wants to run the other way. So I have really studied this from an angle where I myself needed to convince myself how to do this in the most practical and in a way where I afterwards could motivate myself to come and do it again. And I think this is very important, because motivation comes from both knowledge, because knowing why this is healthy for you, but you also have to reckon that you also have a physical memory. So it's definitely important when you do it and how you do it and the whole associations around it. So with that, I want to say that I have actually made, I forgot to tell you, Simon, but I have made a course about how to get started with all this and why and how, and take people through the whole process of getting started with it. And it's a 3-week course if people are interested in this, so they can get hold my hand or something like that when I teach them in this. But what they can do from, if they are totally new, get used to the thought. That is often what I think, that people start thinking about the cold water and going into the cold water, having this resistant or rejecting it in the beginning, saying, oh, it's not for me. I can hear that it's a good idea, but it's not for me. That is already the beginning. So convincing yourself, getting some knowledge, learning how and why, that is one step. But the day that you decide to go, I would recommend that you go in the morning, because, or maybe not at 7 o'clock in the morning, because your core temperature is a half degree lower in the morning, which means that you are already actually cold before you get there. So you could exercise before going into the cold water if you want to, but I would say later in the day, afternoon at least, that is a good place, because then your core temperature has come up a bit, your stress hormones, your coffee has working a bit, and then you are more warm and more, you can say, prepped for taking your first plunge. So this is for your first plunge. If you are adapted, it doesn't really matter on maybe going in the water before bedtime is not a good idea, because it's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system and all your stress hormones. But in the morning or later in the afternoon, I would suggest that.
Okay, and when that person first enters the water, so this person has never been in water this cold before, okay? So when they enter the water, can you kind of walk them through what they're going to experience, so they know what's normal, and they know that what they're experiencing is normal and what to do?
It's completely normal to be a little bit fearful before you step into the cold water and you haven't done this before, especially if it's an open sea, because the water moves and it's probably dark. And but a cold plunge is more, you can see through the water, so you kind of know what's in there. So your fear is going to be different depending on where you go in. But just thinking about that, you don't have to stay there for a long time. Thinking about your breathing is probably the key, most effective thing for controlling your nervous system. So your breath, your breathing is going to be the one controlling how well you would do. And the first time is probably going to be a little bit difficult for you, because you will hyperventilate and you cannot really control that the first time. Or some people can, and I'm amazed by that, but I couldn't. and it's going to vary from people to people, because some have a very sensitive nervous system and others don't. So it varies, and you cannot compare yourself to others. So don't compare yourself to your best friend standing next to you who can go in the water and get control of their breathing in the first round, and that is not something that you can compare to others. But what you can do is try to lower your breathing. Breathe in through the nose and deep into the lungs, and try to make it slow and deep and through the nose. And then you step into the cold water. You exhale completely to make room for air, because you're going to hyperventilate. If you're very sensitive in your nervous system, it could be that you already know that you're maybe a little bit anxious about the situation, or in general an anxious person. Then go gently. So you could go halfway in, up to the navel or something like that, and then try to lower your nervous system by doing nasal breathing. And if you feel that that is not for you, and you just want to take the whole plunge immediately, just 2 seconds in and then run up, that is also a way to go. I don't think that I can't say that as one way is better than the other. I think this is just options. So halfway in and then completely in up to the neck, or completely in one, you can say 1 second, just go in and then quickly up again. But yeah, if you want to train your adaptation, then in time you should try and see if you can switch from mouth breathing to your nasal breathing, which is a kind of a recommendation for your whole life, also your everyday, but also try to do that in the cold water, because that's a way to control your stress level, right? So yeah.
So would it be pretty rare for a first timer to kind of stay long enough in the water to get through the cold shock and find a place of calmness?
Yeah, I would say that is rare. Yeah, that is rare,
Okay.
especially if you are a person who works inside and you sit at you have a desk job. So we know that people who work outside, it could be who work in the road, so builders, so they have a better cold adaptation than people sitting inside in room temperature or temperature neutrality, you can say. So it really depends on how well adapted to the cold you are before that. So that's why I'm also saying don't compare, because some people also have more muscle mass than other people. Different body compositions is also going to have an effect. How well is your circulation at your blood vessels at contracting and dilating? So it's all about feeling. How do you feel when you go into the cold water? And listen to your body. That is my most important message to get out there. You should listen to your own body and not overdo anything. And this is not a competition. The cold water has never been a competition. It's not a training center for competition. It's a place where you go and you connect with yourself, you connect with nature, and you also increase your own metabolism. You get healthier, but it has nothing to do with comparison. This is a selfish thing to do. It's a thing you do for yourself together with others.
So can I clarify one thing? You're getting metabolic benefits from the moment you start doing this, even if you're only able to do across a week 1 or 2 minutes, or is the minimum effective dose the 11 minutes that you found in your study? Like, how do you want people to think about this? If I am someone in that position that's going into the water for the first time, it's not a competition. It's not about trying to do as many minutes or hours in the cold per week that we can do. But is it important that we try and work our way up over time to 11 minutes a week? Is that the goal?
It could be a goal. I mean, I think that it's a good goal because it's tested, and I'm also a researcher, I'm a scientist. So I think that if we go and do something to increase our health, and you want to do something that's going to be beneficial for us, we need to look at research, because that research is really there also to keep us safe. It's not only to look at just positive things, it's also to keep us safe, because if we go for 15 minutes in a cold plunge, who knows if that is beneficial for you? Just because you feel good afterwards, and you go up and you're like, oh, well, I feel good, so this is beneficial for me. You might be fooling yourself, because you don't see what happens down the road, downstream in 20 years or 30 years. You might be micro overloading or overstressing, chronic stressing your body, and you won't see the results before in a long time. So 11 minutes per week could be a beneficial and safe spot to hit, and not overdoing it. So, but I'm also very much a scientist who talks from a micro-stress perspective, and I think that, and this is not something I really came up with. Hans Seeley, who discovered the stress response in 1936, he published this in Nature magazine. So it's the hormesis and micro-stressing and looking at the body as an organ that is healthy when we expose ourselves to some stress. Some stress is good for us because it keeps us alive, but overstressing is something that we should avoid. And finding that upper limit is something that we still need to do in research, but as long as we don't have that, I will still keep saying that 11 minutes per week divided on 2 to 3 days and only with 1 to 2 minutes at a time is probably a safe spot for you to hit.
Mm-hmm. So was your protocol, it just happened to be 11 minutes, or was there different times and you saw that the benefit kind of petered out, it hit a ceiling at 11 minutes?
Yeah, so I was very curious about exactly this. How much should we do? And as I told you, I was not a winter swimmer when I started this research. I came with the idea that we want to go for the lowest dose. So with how little can we actually get the health benefits? Because I knew afterwards that if I'm going to do this, then I don't want to hit a spot that says 20 minutes or 30 minutes, 40 minutes per week or something like that. So I really wanted to see how little can we do. But what I did, and that is why I also did all that field study, is talking to a lot of winter swimmers before I wrote my ethical protocol. I wanted to figure out how much do they do without knowing what is good for them. So what intuitively feels good. And it's not like your intuition is always telling you the truth. We know a lot about that, especially when it comes to snacking and sweet things and stuff like that. That is not your intuition, but it could be. Yeah, it's just dividing that a little bit. So your intuition could be telling you, well, now my cells are overstressed. I'm going up. I feel I had enough cold. And I definitely know that this threshold is a signal in the body telling you, okay, now you are starting to shiver, and then you go up. But I needed to figure that out. So I asked people around in Denmark, so how much do you do? And then I took an average and saw that 2 to 3 times per week, if you are a winter swimmer in Denmark, then that is kind of like the sweet spot or where it's in an average of what people do. And most people just dip in the water, and some swim strokes, but not many. So averaging that out, I found out that I would have to find subjects for my study who did this 2 to 3 times per week. But I didn't want to dictate how much they were in the water. I would rather just look at what happens when they're in the water, if they are that group that does this 2 to 3 times per week, but that seems reasonable to me. That is like the average what people do. And I just recorded that, how much time were they in the water per week and how much time were they in the sauna per week. And I recruited subjects who are winter swimmers who have already been winter swimming for 2 to 3 seasons. So I knew they were already in the drill. They knew that they're not going to stop the study or something like that. They were also trained winter swimmers. So the outcome of this was to see if trained winter swimmers have more efficient brown fat or more volume of the brown fat, more increase in metabolism than a control group who were matched on age, gender, fitness level, body composition, and diet, I think also.
A great study. Fun study.
Yeah, so I wanted to see the minimum threshold, but still I wanted to observe at the same time. So, but 11 minutes and 50 cold and 57 minutes of heat was what came out of that study.
Okay, so 11 minutes of cold, 57 minutes of heat. Those were the numbers where people had either the most brown fat or the most sort of metabolically active brown fat.
Yeah, you can see when you're then trained, then 11 minutes and 57 minutes in the heat. That is what adapted people to cold and heat can do. This is not something that you do the first time you go and take a plunge. You won't build up 11 minutes in the first week. Or I don't think that people should do that, because that is also overstressing the body. Like saying you don't start with a marathon, right? You don't run for a marathon the first day you want to start running. You start by running maybe 2 or 5 kilometers, and then you increase that. So that is also my suggestion.
Okay, but that's a good That's a good North Star for people to kind of build up to across a week. 11 minutes of cold, 57 minutes of sauna, and if you're wanting to optimize for those metabolic benefits, to finish in the cold and not sit down, keep moving.
Yeah, exactly.
Which we discussed earlier. A couple other questions I have. Am I doing this with clothes on, or am I jumping in to the ocean nude? Because as I understand it, there's different views on that.
I think that people should do what's, you can say, socially accepted where you are. This has everything to do with context, right? It could be very weird to be naked in some places, where other places it's what you do. So in Denmark, we have actually winter swimming clubs where they swim naked, and that is what they do. If you have a swimsuit on, and I had actually, then you could get a little bit of people looking at you like, are you scared of us, or are you not comfortable with yourself? That is like a discussion. So you should just do what feels comfortable for you. And I don't think that people should swim with clothes on, but a swimsuit or swim trunks, I mean, that's not gonna make any difference to your health benefits. So swim the way, or plunge the way you feel most comfortable, but also what feels good in a social context.
Yeah, I have to admit, I laughed out loud when I got to a section of your book called The Disappearing Penis.
Yes.
Can you share that story?
well, yes, I can. I forgot that story, and it's in the book, and I'm actually happy that it's in the book. that was an experience I had when I did my last winter swimming study, which was a randomized controlled trial, and it's not published yet. But I trained my winter swimmers from never trying this before. So the study was about recruiting people who all wanted to winter swim, and one half of the group, I trained them for winter swimming, and the other group were just control groups. So we had this last person in the winter swimming group who should try his first plunge ever in his life. And this is in Copenhagen. And we all met up, all the rest of the group, and also me, and also my crew from my team. And we wanted to celebrate because he was the last one going in. And he was so excited because he was the last one, and he was his first dip. And you could clearly see and hear that he was a bit nervous. He was talking and laughing aloud on the jetty, and everybody was talking, and he was taking off his clothes, and he's like, okay, now so I go in, and I gave him some instructions to how to do this. And then he went in the water together with the others, and then quickly went up again. And as soon as he came up the stairs, and they were naked. They were naked because at this club they swim naked. He screamed, and I think that whole Copenhagen could hear this. My penis has disappeared. And I didn't look, but I was like, okay, I trust you.
Gosh.
Man,
Yeah.
he was like the funny guy in the club. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think take note, gents. I think we all know what the cold can do there. Okay, on a more serious note, the 11 minutes of cold and the 57 minutes of heat. What was the temperature? I know it's not about being completely exact, but if someone's thinking, okay, with that protocol. If someone has an ice bath or has a sauna, are there sort of target temperatures that we should perhaps aim for?
I'm tempted to say no, actually, because, and that is again going back to my reasoning about changing the temperature. So I think it's more important that you train your temperature regulation by changing the temperature, just like the nature would change the temperature when you go out. It's not important if it's 9 degrees Celsius or if it's 2 degrees Celsius. I mean, of course, the activation of your sympathetic nervous system is going to be higher and faster, or at least faster, and and because of that, you can just stay in the water for a shorter amount of time. If the temperature is higher, then you can go for a little bit longer. So I think it's just changing the temperature, and I think that you should just keep your metabolism and your going by changing the temperature. Not every time, you don't have to do that. If you have a plunge and it's a certain degree, then you can keep that maybe for a week or two or whatever. But changing it over time would definitely challenge yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Your study, or at least the one that I saw in Cell, that was male subjects. Have you given any, I guess, thoughts as to whether these protocols, and I appreciate there just may not be evidence, but do you think for any reason the protocol or approach to temperature or duration would be different for a female versus a male?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked me this question, actually, because I just want to reflect on that a bit, because it's something that people have asked me a lot, and some actually get a little bit, they want to discuss at least why I recruited only men for my study. And I totally understand why. And being a female, that it could seem like I wanted males in my study, but it's not like that. I know that in the US, it is almost a requirement that you include both men and women in the studies. But at this time where I did my study, back in 2016, and being like a pre-PhD, I listened to my supervisors. And if they say, if you do this study, you should only look at men, because that is the tradition of physiology studies at that time. And that has changed a bit now within the last 8 years now. But at that time, it was like, we don't know whether this is going to be different for men and women and in your for cold exposure. But we do know that there is a difference in the amount of brown fat that women and men have. And because women also have their cycles and therefore also changes in hormones, women were in that study not chosen, because if women have more brown fat than men, I would need double up on the groups, because I cannot compare the difference of men and women on winter swimming, because the women probably have more brown fat already from the beginning. So you see where I'm going? It's like, and the study was a concept study because no one has done this before. And I needed to convince a lot of people that this was a super good idea. And so I needed to go lower numbers, and I needed to be very precise of what I wanted to do. But I want to say that in the next study I did, I included both men and women. But just to say, we did include men, and they have less brown fat than women. So we took the lowest bar, you can say, and men have activation of the brown fat and health benefits from this 11 minutes per week and 57 in the sauna, and women do as well. So it's not like you have to think about this as any difference, actually. It's just because of a research study that is like very fair and square. It has to be very precise. Then it was done in that way. But women benefit from this protocol as well. There's nothing that suggests they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the sauna, I know a lot of people will be thinking, does it matter what type of sauna I get into, or does it just need to be hot and uncomfortable?
So on the sauna, it just needs to be hot and uncomfortable. Yeah. So, and if you have an infrared and you can get, you just use it a little bit longer, I guess. So any heat is good for you. So you can also use a hot tub, right? So it's just any heat stress and any cold stress that you can get. And there are different ways of using this, of course, and that is also something that I teach. But it's not like you can take the 57 minutes from my protocol and then correspond that to the same benefits using an infrared. It doesn't translate directly like that. But maybe if you use the infrared a little bit longer or more, then you will have similar effects. We don't know, because that is not tested with the 57 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must say I find sauna particularly uncomfortable. Like I would choose a plunge, an ice plunge over a sauna any day of the week, but I know people are different there.
Yeah,
Um,
but you're definitely not the first to say that. I have heard this before, and I agree with you now that I'm cold adapted. And I started as a winter swimmer without the sauna for the first 3 years. So 3 years without a sauna, and today I love the sauna. Now I have access to one, but I still prefer a cold dip from sitting too long in the sauna. But I just know that I need to build that up a bit. I can get up to the 57 minutes per week. I can do that, but I definitely struggle more in the heat.
Often when things become super trendy on social media, it kind of doesn't take long for a few myths to surface. As a scientist that's researching this space, are there any myths out there about winter swimming or sauna, maybe things that we haven't covered that you would like to sort of put to rest?
Maybe I have a question, actually. I don't know if you can answer it, but I'm kind of puzzled with the head dunking. I don't know if it's because people feel more fresh afterwards. I do, but I just put water in my face, but I don't do the head dunking. I'm just wondering why this is like becoming a thing that I see that everybody is doing. Maybe they start by head dunking or they end with head dunking, but I don't know. It's like,
I mean, it definitely feels very fresh, but I'm conscious as well, and I read in your book that blood flow to the brain actually goes down when you're in an ice plunge, right? So it would seem perhaps not a great idea to spend at least too long underwater. But anecdotally speaking, I think it feels good. Maybe it sends a signal to everyone around you that you're cold adapted. I'm not sure, but the decrease in blood flow to the brain is interesting. That I was reading about in your book. Can you perhaps just explain what happens there, and are there any kind of, I guess, safety protocols that one should be aware of when getting into an ice plunge for the first time?
yeah, I can just tell you a little about studies in this, because we have seen in studies, and this is something that was performed in Denmark at Bispebjerg Hospital, where they have tested how much blood flow comes to the brain when you submerge into cold water up to the neck. So this is without the head dunking, okay? So it seems that the decrease is 30% because you activate the sympathetic nervous system. And when you do that, you will have less blood flow to the brain. And this is also something people can think about when they, in their daily day, just go around and are a bit stressed. When we activate our sympathetic nervous system from cold plunging or from stressful thoughts or something that's stressing us, we have less blood flow to the brain, which makes us think or focus, decreases our focus and alert and attentiveness to what we are doing. So what happens when you go into the cold water is a blood flow that decreases by 30% to the brain. And that is why you feel this a bit, maybe you feel a little bit dizzy, or you could feel that you are getting a little bit lightheaded, at least in the water. But there is also studies and look a little bit into this to see what's going on. And all the benefits comes from activating your cold receptors in the skin. So that's why I'm a little bit interested in what do we get from the head dunking? Do we get anything out of it? Or is it actually increasing the danger of maybe getting to lower core temperatures or getting hypothermic? Is there any risk here? And I don't think that people see cold plunging as any risk, but I think it's very important to talk about this because the risk is absolutely there. And by doing the head dunk, it might be that our core temperature rate decreases even faster. So to get more knowledge about this, I looked into the literature and found a study from Canada showing that they compared, there was a comparison equation study. So they looked at multiple studies where people have been submerged into cold water up to the neck, and they saw that the heat loss, they compared the heat loss in one group of studies to another group of studies where they also did the head dunking on top of that. And they saw that the heat loss from your core decreases by 11%, or increases, sorry. The heat loss from the core increases by 11% from submerging up to the neck, and you can then add a heat loss rate that increases by 36% if you dunk the head. And that is because when you dunk the head into the water, your core temperature, your core, doesn't have the protection of your tissue like you have on your limbs, right? So the head is a direct way to your core. So if you dunk the head, you will have a direct pathway to a motorway to your inner organs. So the heat loss rate will increase by 36%. And I think that's huge. That means that if you do a head dunk, you will be more likely to get hypothermic and also getting dizzy from even more decrease in blood flow to the brain. So just be careful. And I always say that people shouldn't do this alone, because it's also a safety thing that if we are together with others, we increase the safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a good thing for people to keep in mind. Let's finish here. I think some of us might walk away from here and really want to channel our inner Scandinavian when we next do our ice plunge. And there's a bit of lingo in the book, Winter Swimming, that I thought we could maybe rapid fire. We could just finish with these phrases. You could explain to us what these mean so that we can use these when we're ice plunging or in the sauna. Create a bit of friendly chatter with people. Who is a radiator swimmer?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I put this winter swimming lingo in the book because I think they are very funny, and we use these in Denmark and have these special sayings about people who and on how they use the cold and the heat. So a radiator swimmer is one who goes into the sauna first and then plunges afterwards, which is not right. They should plunge first and then go into the sauna.
Okay. Plunge first, then go into the sauna.
Yeah.
But finish in the plunge.
Yeah. Start and finish in the plunge.
Yeah. Okay. And next one, what is baptism by fire? I get the feeling that there could be a few of these this week.
Oh, yes. So baptism by fire is your first dip into the cold water. And this is something that we have been doing, always celebrating the first time that you go into the cold water. So that is your baptism, you can say. But remember to celebrate if you do it, because that was tough and you are very cool because you did that. But yeah, so baptism by fire is a way of celebrating your first plunge. And it's often combined with a ceremony, especially in Russia, actually, they do this.
Okay, there you go. Baptism by fire. So something to be proud of. What about champagne under the skin?
Oh, yeah, that is the best feeling. So after a cold plunge, you can get this tingling feeling under your skin, which you cannot really describe that well. But I came up with this word. That's champagne under your skin, because it's like bubbles under your skin and it tingles a little bit. But also you can use the champagne under your skin after you have been into cold water with ice, so slush ice on the water, and you go into that. That is the most amazing feeling that you can feel on your skin. It tickles and you get this champagne under your skin, bubbling feeling, tingling feelings under the skin afterwards. So especially in very cold water. So it corresponds to that.
Eyes at eye level. This one seems like a useful one.
Yes. So eyes at eye level. That is a saying from a winter swimming club here in Denmark, because they swim. They plunge without swimsuit. So they always just say eyes at eye level. That is just what we do. We never look at bodies, and And the funny thing is actually, if you go there and you have been there a few times, you would totally forget that people are naked. You don't look at it. It's just so natural. It's just something that they do in some clubs in Denmark. It's not all, definitely not all, but there are still some clubs who holds on to this very old tradition, which goes hundreds of years back. So they keep this, but they say eyes at eye level, because then you don't feel that people are looking at you. And I think it's very respectful also.
It is respectful. Last one, and I'm very interested to know the answer to this. I'd love to become a Viking. So tell me about reaching Viking status. Do you need to get into the cold water once a week, twice a week? What is the minimum frequency to join the Viking club?
A Viking is something that you can become, but you have to train in the cold. So being a Danish Viking is something everybody can train. They can go into the cold and they can become a Viking in your physiology and in your spirit. You can become very strong.
Well, Dr. Soeberg, thank you so much. This has been really, really informative. I love your passion. I love the backstory. I love the fact that you're bringing science to the table on a practice that's really, really popular, but you're helping people refine their protocol and make better use of it, and also think about the safety. So thank you so much for the discussion and your contribution to all the science in this space. I'm really excited to watch this space and see what studies come out in future years, both from your work and others. And you made mention of scientists looking at the use of cold therapy for depression and anxiety, things like that. I think will be super interesting to keep an eye on. So thank you for doing this. I'll put links to your social media accounts, to your website. Of course, you mentioned that you have a 3-week and a 12-week course. Is that right?
Yeah, the 3-week course is ready now, so people can go and take that. But I'm also preparing a 12-week course and also an instructor education, because I feel that in this space we need to educate people on how to coach other people to do this, because it takes knowledge to do this in a right way, in a safe way, in a healthy way, I think. And people have asked me, can you teach me this? And that's why I think that there is a need for this also. And I love to teach. That is why I'm on social medias and I talk about this all the time. So being a teacher is really my passion as well. So that is why I opened my institute, Soeberg Institute, my school.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. And I saw on the emails, I think your team created a 10% discount for the Proof community. So I'll put that into the show notes as well, and people can make use of that if they'd like. And lastly, again, congratulations on the new book. Not necessarily the focus of today, but I'm sure we covered some of it. But if folks are kind of wanting to get their hands on that book, or just sort of learn more about it, what details can you give them? When's that coming out, and where will that be available, and how can people get it?
Yeah, so I definitely want to stress that Winter Swimming is a really good book to start with. And because that is the background story and all what we talked about today, that is in this book, in Winter Swimming, but also it gives you the insights of what is the brown fat. And in the next book, which will come out, I'm pretty sure, I hope, or fingers crossed, that it will come out in English, but we don't know yet, because I just had book release in Danish of Thermalist yesterday, actually, from recording this. So it will come out eventually. Maybe it's in a year, maybe it's in a few months. I really don't know at this time. But Winter Swimming is there, so you can read that and get much of the information we also just talked about. But you can also go on my webpage and read a lot. You can take my courses. Thermalist is coming, but I think it's going to take a little bit, because it took a couple of years for Winter Swimming to come out even. So yeah, it just takes time.
Well, start practicing your Danish.
Yes.
People can add that to their list. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for having me.
There we go, friends. Thank you for showing up and the effort you're making to take better control of your health. I look forward to hanging out with you again next week for another episode.